Hello, welcome back. So, in our module this week, we're going to talk a little bit about rhetorical analysis, academic arguments, and structuring arguments. So, the purpose of this video is to discuss briefly rhetorical analysis. I will tell you there's a lot that is involved within rhetorical analysis, so you might have to do a little more studying on your own, but that's okay. I think we can cover pretty much a basic set of guidelines for rhetorical analysis in this video. So to get started, I'd like to first look at this sheet here that you can see on your screen share. This is actually from North Carolina State University. Thank you so much for the sheet. So on this sheet, what they start with is what in the world is a rhetorical analysis? But first, let's define what a rhetorical analysis is not. And this is really important because often it's more important to know what something is not than what it is. So here it says a rhetorical analysis is not a summary of a literary work or a scholarly article. You may have analyzed a novel's plotline or have taken apart the meaning of Shakespeare's to be or not to be soliloquy and Hamlet. However, trying to understand the meaning of a work or summarize a story is not the goal of a rhetorical analysis. So a rhetorical analysis is not summary. Instead, what a rhetorical analysis is it's examining the parts of a text to see how it operates. And most importantly, it's not only seeing how it operates, but is it effective? So here, the definition on our sheet, you can see where I'm highlighting here. It says a rhetorical analysis requires you to apply your critical reading skills in order to break down a text. In essence, you break off the parts from the whole of the piece you're analyzing. The goal of rhetorical analysis is to articulate how the author writes rather than what they actually wrote. To do this, you will analyze the strategies the author uses to achieve his or her goal or purpose of writing their piece. Keep in mind that writers of different disciplines often use varying writing strategies in order to achieve their goals, so it is okay to analyze, say, a scientific article differently than you would something from the humanities. They have different goals in mind and thus will be using different writing strategies. I'd like to just follow up with I'm in the wrong chapter. Follow up with a definition from one of my textbooks here that I have in my office. Everything's an argument. And it says that a rhetorical analysis is a close reading of a text to find out how and whether or not it works to persuade. So it's how does it persuade and is it effective? And so what's nice about this is that it teaches us how to critically examine the world around us, which is a great skill to have, but it also shows us how to be better writers and create stronger arguments for ourselves. Right? Reading other people's work is really important, and seeing what works, then we can begin to mimic that. And seeing what doesn't work, we can learn what not to do in our writing too. Because again, just like it's important to know what something is not, it's also important to know what not to do in writing. So it's a sort of a two-pronged approach. One, it's to be able to analyze the world around us and different forms of text, but also for us to understand how we can become better writers and create stronger arguments in our own lives. There's a list of questions on this sheet that for you to ask yourself when you're reading and rereading your articles. But before I get into that, I'd like to first discuss the importance of understanding purpose and audience in both other people's writing and your own. So I always say the first step to good writing is understanding the prompt, but I think tied with that is also understanding the purpose and the audience. If we know what the writer's trying to do and who is supposed to be reading it, that tells us what else should follow. And the same thing is true for our own writing. If we know, all right, this is what I'm supposed to be doing and this is who I'm writing it for, that tells us what to do. So for instance, let's say your purpose is to persuade and your audience is a college professor. The way in which you write for that professor will be different than the way it would be, say, for a family member or a public blog, right? Your purpose is to persuade, but to do that, for a professor, you will probably have to use different types of research than what you might do for something like a Facebook post, right? Your research might be a little more scholarly, coming from academic journals. Your language might, again, be a little more scholarly, your diction, the words that you choose. So it really, the way we craft our writing depends on what the purpose is and the audience. Or let's say you're just writing something informative for a blog. You might still have research, but the research might be a little less academic or scholarly, so to speak. I don't know if you guys are listening to that podcast, My Favorite Murder. I just keep talking about it everywhere I go. But they're very funny about their research, right? Because sometimes the research is like, it's not that it's wrong. Well, actually, they do have some incorrect stuff sometimes. But it's sort of like loose, shallow web sort of research. But their audience is the general public, and their purpose is to tell a story, but also to be funny. It's a true crime comedy podcast. So the purpose is to tell a story that is true and accurate, but to also be funny. So their purpose and audience is very, very different. So that means they can do a little bit different, or maybe, let me rephrase that. They can structure things a little differently in their arguments. Whereas if they were to then retell those stories, say for an academic journal for a group of professors, it would be much, much more tightened up and buttoned up for sure. So with that in mind, purpose and audience, number one thing, you have to know the purpose and audience for your own writing and also for that which you are analyzing. So once you understand the audience and purpose, then you can start moving into some of these other questions. And some of these questions parallel purpose and audience. So number one, what is the thesis? What is the overall argument the author presents? Number two, what did the author choose to study and why? Number three, what is the purpose? To inform, persuade, to criticize. Who is the author's intended audience? How does the writer arrange his or her ideas? How does the writer use diction? How does the writer use dialogue? Are important terms repeated? What is the sentence structure of the text? Are there fragments, run-ons, declarative, imperative, exclamatory? What effect does that have? Does the writer use punctuation to create an effect, such as italics, underlining, or parentheses? Which marks does the writer use and when? So these are some things that you can think about as you're looking through readings or various texts in this class. So again, it's what's the purpose, what is the audience, and how do they achieve that purpose for that audience, and does it work? How do they achieve it? Does it work? Those are the things that we want to answer through our rhetorical analysis. A few other things that you can think about, and you already have a little bit of practice with this, is you can look at the rhetorical appeals such as ethos, logos, and pathos. They're sort of umbrella terms for these other questions that we ask. So let's look at pathos, for example. Let's say the piece of writing that we're looking at is very emotional. What sort of language do they use that is emotional? So if it's very, very argumentative and persuasive, what sort of charged language do they use? Or if it's supposed to evoke some sort of sadness or emotion from us, what sort of figurative language do they use to garner that experience from the reader? So those are some things you can ask in terms of language and pathos for written argument, of course. If you're looking at logos, you can look again at like what does the writer choose to study, what sort of facts and information do they give, and so on. So you can use these different rhetorical appeals to analyze a piece of writing. You can also look at what type of genre it is. You can look at what authorities does the argument rely on or appeal to, ethos. What claims are advanced in the argument, what are the contexts, social, political, historical, cultural for the argument, what shape does the argument take, how is the argument organized or arranged, so you can look at structure, and how does the language or style of argument work to persuade an audience. So these are things that we can think about. We'll get a little more practice with this as we move into our assignments and discussion boards. But essentially what's the most important to understand is that we are asking questions to see how the parts of the whole work, to see how the argument works and if it's effective. Something that's important to remember that's noted down here, that these are questions that you should be asking yourself. I'll highlight here. If you think of other important ideas and strategies the author is using, consider using those as well. Right? Writers have unique strategies. There's a lot of crafty and creative people out there, so they're using different strategies all the time in order to persuade. So this module, we'll be looking a little bit more into this. If you have questions, let me know. I'll be posting this handout on your module, so you can look at that too. But if you need a little extra chat about it or some more resources, let me know. I'm happy to provide them. And I will see you in the next video. Have a great day.